In this video, you'll learn how to recognize passive and active voice and how to change passive to active voice. Your professors often request that you do this, and it can be confusing. First, you'll learn how to recognize passive voice, when to change it to active voice, and when it's possible to keep passive voice instead of changing it to active voice. First, what is passive voice? These are some examples of passive construction. There are many symptoms that indicate acute appendicitis. Vital signs were recorded for the patient, and data were analyzed using SPSS. See if you can notice any similarities between these three example sentences. We can see that these three examples are passive because the subject, which is the noun that takes the verb, is not present or is not emphasized in any of those sentences. Now, with active voice, on the other hand, the subject or the noun and its verb come first or in the primary position in the sentence. Here are some quick examples of active voice. Notice the placement of the subject and the verb in each sentence. Here I've highlighted the subjects in green and the verbs in red. Notice how each subject-verb combination is in the primary position in the sentence. Now, why should you choose active voice? Well, first and foremost, you're going to eliminate any confusion or lack of clarity in the sentence. You are also going to shorten the sentence. When you put the subject and verb first, you'll usually have a lower word count. And you'll keep the action of the text moving forward because your actors and their verbs will be emphasized. Here's an example, the first from our list. There are many symptoms that indicate acute appendicitis. What are the subject and the verb? You can see here the subject is in green and the verb is in red. Many symptoms indicate. This is a good example because it shows a very common indicator of passive construction, the there is, there are, there were construction. These phrases very commonly replace the subject and the verb in the beginning of a sentence. Notice how, when we change from passive to active construction, the subject, many symptoms, comes first, and the verb, indicate, comes second. The there are phrase is removed. To review, for active voice, the subject and the verb are in the primary position, usually in the beginning. You'll have fewer words in your sentence when you have an active construction rather than a passive one, and you'll have no confusion about the topic of the sentence because your actor and its verb are in the primary position. Let's look at our second example. Vital signs were recorded for the patient. Now, here we have two options. You can retain passive voice if the subject is not the focus or is not known, or you can use active voice, which is always your better choice because it removes all confusion and provides concise, clear language. For option 1, you can use the possessive to make a slightly better passive construction. The patient's vital signs were recorded. It's still passive because the verb recorded has no subject. We don't know who did the recording, but perhaps the actor is unknown, and in that case, it's okay to retain that option 1 construction. Now, option 2 is obviously to change the passive to active voice so that the subject and the verb are emphasized. You'll see here in this active sentence, the RN recorded the patient's vital signs. Now we know who took the verb, who did the recording. The RN did the recording. And you can see when we highlight the parts of the sentence, the RN is the subject, recorded is the verb, and the vital signs are the object. Let's look at our third example. Data were analyzed using SPSS. This is a passive construction because we don't know who analyzed the data. Now, if that's not important, if the data are the focus, not who analyzed the data, you may retain passive construction. See the bottom of APA 6th edition manual, page 77 for details. Let's look at this again. Passive is data were analyzed using SPSS. Active could be we analyzed the data using SPSS. Passive construction commonly occurs in the methods section because writers are reluctant to use the personal pronouns I or we in their papers. However, both APA and AMA encourage these personal pronouns to retain active voice and avoid any messy or confusing language. Now, remember that quick list of 3 active sentences that you viewed at the beginning of the clip? Look at them again and notice that the subject and the verb are in the primary position in all 3 sentences. How about one more example? There will be a nurse who will lead the patient education on day 2. This is obviously a passive construction. Where are the subject and the verb? You'll see that there will phrase at the beginning that indicates passive voice. Notice that a nurse is the subject and will lead is the verb, but those 2 phrases are in the middle of the sentence. Contrast this with our active construction, in which a nurse will lead is at the beginning of the sentence. Another option for active construction is this one. On day 2, a nurse will lead the patient education. Notice that on day 2 comes before the subject and the verb. However, it's a prepositional phrase and it doesn't interfere with the subject and the verb being in the primary position of the sentence. The bottom line for passive versus active construction is this. Your paper will always be stronger if you replace passive with active voice. Try to reserve any passive construction for the methods section, and only if the subject or actor is not known.